Let's do this.
All right, so this weekend you are going to be showcasing some material, right? Some new and some. You tell me.
Well, I like to think of it as a kind of off the cuff, mini retrospective of things, but it's really not my feature work that's known to people. So it's lesser known work by me than feature films that I've done. So it's focusing primarily on a work that I did that I'm quite proud of in 1978, which was shot on Super 8 in the housing project where Lee Quinones, who's the star of Wildstyle, the Smith Projects, which is north of the Brooklyn Bridge, but really, as he puts it, it connects to the whole lower deck of the Lower East Side. In other words, you go past where he lived and you see these, you once saw gigantic handball court murals stretching up Madison, going north towards the Lower East Side as we know it. And I was working in that area from 1977 and 1978 primarily. Mm-hmm. And the making of this film, which is called The Deadly Art of Survival, undoubtedly is what led to making Wildstyle. There could have never been a Wildstyle without making this film first, primarily because my involvement in that neighborhood with Nathan Ingram, who's he's the star of the movie, mm-hmm. And he is a heroic figure and well known in the neighborhood for having been the Sifu of a martial arts school, which was very powerful in terms of helping young kids create an alternative focus in their life, a spiritual discipline. People saw the Bruce Lee, who had died a few years earlier, mm-hmm. hung over all the whole street culture, was infused by a kind of sense of awe about Bruce Lee, which is, I always found amazing to me that kids from black and Puerto Rican neighborhoods were so focused on Chinese culture, but especially the kung fu movies were very, very powerful in terms of giving people a kind of street image which they could both be entertained by but also inspired by. Mm-hmm. And in this case, this movie, which was called The Deadly Art of Survival, we have worked, that is Anthology, and I have worked for a year and a half to create a brand new, very high-quality version of this movie, a digital version of the movie, going back to the original materials that the movie was shot on. And this was paid for by the Andy Warhol Foundation.
What's that?
The Andy Warhol Foundation funds a whole myriad of creative institutions and personalities to recollect work and refurbish and make a new work that is out there, because we have this particular grant was to work on movies from the 70s and early 80s that deserved attention, and movies can fall through the cracks, and disappear.
You think as many as there are and that are keep coming, being found and whatnot, but that people don't have any idea necessarily of how many have been lost over the years.
Most of them are gone. Most of them. And in the case of this particular film, people have seen it in a smaller version, let's say a version that was 60 minutes long, and it was on DV, which is very, not a great quality. And this is a version that will be 73 minutes long, mm-hmm. and much richer visually, and the sound and everything. I think it's quite good. I'm not saying the movie is genius, but I'm saying that the quality of the film is good.
That's wonderful.
And it has not only the kind of look and feel of what housing projects and the culture in housing projects, that street culture, whatever you want to call it, the way people dressed. It was largely shot outdoors, and there are some amazing fight sequences. So there's plenty of action in this film, mm-hmm. and there's also some real views of, like, in a pool hall, or a scene in the church, the Baptist church that Nathan's family ran on 14th Street, mm-hmm. Is very much in evidence in this, and I think those are time capsules of a culture that has disappeared.
Totally. Is that the one that's across from Stuyvesant or Peter Cooper?
Mount Olive Church, it was called, and it was it was in the middle of 14th Street. I'm not sure exactly where, but the thing is that the film was shown at the Times Square show. It was shown at the New Cinema, which was the sort of collab funded, Eric Mitchell mm-hmm. organized showing, where all the downtown Super 8 classic films from the late 70s were shown at this location in 1979. But it was also shown on in a large theater on 2nd Avenue, and we brought the entire school. We would travel with the school, like up to the Bronx, to Fashion Moda and other places, where they would perform a live show, mm-hmm. which related a lot to what was happening in the film. And then we would show the movie, which was about 70 minutes.
That was my next question. Okay. And it is a little bit of a hybrid?
It's a hybrid, exactly the way, this is what's interesting to me about it, is that it's a hybrid exactly the way Wildstyle was a hybrid. Okay. In other words, I'm working completely with the kids in the neighborhood. Real characters that are in the story are playing themselves. Mm-hmm. I didn't tend to do outside casting, so-called. There's no actors in this film. Everything is shot in the real locations of the film, around the Brooklyn Bridge, which was right where Lee Quinones lived at that time. And in many ways, it's kind of a shoestring version of what you see in Wildstyle, without the going into the subway yards and seeing, the great stuff happening in the clubs and that kind of thing. It's not the Bronx, it's the Lower East Side. But in a way, this is a picture of Lee Quinones' neighborhood, because Lee Quinones was actually a member of this school and knew all these people. And he didn't, I found him. Mm-hmm. I found him while I was making the film. I was shooting a scene in front of one of his Howard the Duck mural, which later became famous. But at the time, he had just painted it in 1978. And I said, "You've got to be in this film." And he just said, "Bet." And then he tooled off in his motorbike, and I wasn't able to find him after that. So there are many other films that are going to be shown at Anthology next weekend. And as you saw when you entered my space here, on the floor is a sizable pile of 16 millimeter film cans, mm-hmm. which are films which exist only in 16 millimeter. I've not seen these films since I made these films.
What?
In 1976 to 1978. I have not seen those films.
Have you spot checked them for that they're okay, that they're in good shape, and
No,
okay.
I didn't, but we will.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing is that I found them.
That you found them.
The important thing is that they are complete prints. In those days, Super 8 and 16 millimeter, I was shooting with reversal and not using negative to shoot, which was the way film artists almost always have worked.
Mm-hmm.
Like Warhol always shot in reversal, and most people shot in reversal because you didn't have to deal with cutting negatives to see what your product is, or work prints and all these things, which were very time-consuming and expensive.
So what is a reversal?
Reversal means that when you see the film come back from the lab, it's in the full color that you understand it to be, and not a negative version of the color for printing purposes. Negative is for when you need to make lots of prints of your film.
Right.
So there are many other films that I'm going to be showing also, besides these 16 millimeter films that are from the mid 70s, which I don't know. I think it's it's adventurous for me to show them to people without having to look at them myself. And they are narrative travel films that I made that are, in a sense, somewhat autobiographical, but kind of poetic, and just what I think film artists were doing in the mid 70s. My generation that started to make films in the mid to late 70s really started to move on making a kind of simple narrative film. Amos Poe and the Beat, Scott and Beth B.
Right.
I think there was a turning away from more abstract or poetic kind of filmmaking, and more towards kind of a pop, like a super shoestring pop aesthetic, which was to make a genre film. Like this Kung Fu movie is a genre Super 8 feature of a Kung Fu movie, but it's not. It's also it was also an art film made for that context. So all of those films were really art films. They weren't real genre films.
Gotcha.
They were playing at being genre films. Other films that I'm going to be showing are my two films that I made when I moved to Times Square, and I made two films there. Really in the mid to late 80s. This was after I had my first child with Jane Dixon, and after Joe was born, I got myself one of these what they called 8mm video cameras, which were very easy to use and shot sound and picture together. And at the time, I really had missed Super 8 filmmaking, because once you get away from Super 8 and you're into 16 millimeter, it becomes much more complicated with crews and budgets and a lot of other things. And I missed that, and I started to shoot a lot of video. And when I was in Times Square living with Jane for all those years, we lived there for 12 years, right on the corner across from Show World in Times Square. And there was stuff going on every night of the week.
Yeah, it was like
I would be in the middle of the night, I would hear, bitch, and someone would throw a garbage can, and it would be,
right.
People were getting decked, and there was drug deals, and there was and I
shot
this. I shot this out my window.
Yeah,
whatever was going on, and because it was really my home movie reels, I was shooting my children's birthdays and my children doing things, and then I would be shooting something at night. And I had this experience of showing people when they'd come over, like, oh, there's my son's birthday. Oh, here comes, there's some transvestites throwing garbage cans at police.
Cop. Yeah.
And so it wasn't until after years of doing this that it occurred to me, oh, this is actually a movie. And it was very embarrassing at first to imagine your home movie as a movie. But the more I thought about it, I thought, no, this is a really interesting genre kind of putting my interest in the street culture together with my actual domestic real life. And I made that and finished it and shown it at the New York Film Festival in 1991 was when the final film was shown. And immediately started shooting. I was shooting films with my wife Jane,
mm-hmm.
because she was looking at this video work that I was doing. She was making paintings of it, and then I was looking at what she was doing. And honestly, all along, I was really inspired by Jane's vision of looking out the window and making paintings and art from things that you could see out our window. Like there was this, a block away, you could see this white-haired prostitute that was always out there right at about 8 o'clock, when as soon as it would get dark, this white-haired prostitute would appear under this light. And it was very visible. And she made several paintings of this. And that became iconic to where we were living in the world that we were living in. And so, in a sense, it was a collaboration with Jane
mm-hmm.
to make more of this film and to connect it to her artwork. And I called that Jane in Peepland. It was my new installment of what was going on. And then we left Times Square to come down to Tribeca, and that was the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I made lots of films with other artists that I was working with. Like I made a film with my twin brother, John.
Mm-hmm.
I made a film with Kiki Smith. I made a film, it's called Kiki in the Flesh,
mm-hmm.
and a film with Tom Otterness, and a film which a lot of people have seen quite a bit, which is a film with Martin Wong. And that's been seen all over, that people are quite taken by that.
Mm-hmm.
These are not being shown at
okay.
these.
That was my next.
Yeah, what I was trying to say is that my Times Square movies that I made, Doin Time in Times Square and Jane in Peepland, will be shown at Anthology on Saturday night.
Oh, very good.
That will be an
amazing
program,
yeah.
and there
especially
will.
On the big.
And so on Saturday we're going to have these
mm-hmm.
16 millimeter films for a 6 o'clock program, and then in the evening program will be the Times Square movies, and then we move on to Sunday, which was my day, because I'm really happy and excited to show people all the hip-hop related films that I've been doing. Like in the past 10 years, I've made probably 20 films.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't know that I make these films, but they're very, very contemporary, dynamic. Some of them are quite shocking for people to see. I like to think of like what I do with film is kind of like stage diving into the content.
Mosh pit? Into the
it's
mosh pit of content?
Yes, the world in which I'm working with, and there are these moments where the whole thing just opens up, and I'm like no longer even there. I'm just in it, and it's happened a couple times recently, and I'm working on doing something tomorrow and in 2 weeks.
Uh-huh.
So there's a lot coming up. And what this has to do with is work related to the subway.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been shooting on the subway a lot. I did something about a week ago on the subway that was really interesting. There was kind of a flash mob on the subway with beatboxers and MCs and some dancers. And tomorrow I'm planning to go out to the Q train
mm-hmm.
with a group called the Waffle Crew, and we're having our meeting on the Q train, which I think is really an interesting idea because that's their workplace and studio.
In transit.
On a moving train, yeah.
The other day when you went and you shot something, you said also on the train, right?
Yeah,
on the subway. Was that?
That is something that I went to something that was already organized by Kid Lucky, and they do an annual kind of beatbox cipher on the this one was on the J train, which is one of my favorite trains for seeing performance.
Just in the spontaneity of being on it, and there's something happens, or like
it's
where
certain
it's more planned
trains.
than that.
Certain trains really have action on them, and the Q train. The Waffle Crew really likes the Q train because the center posts, the metal poles that people. And they do call it pole dancing. It's really funny, but they are not in the center, but they are on the sides,
like staggered
on the sides, so that there is more room for real
momentum.
Some things to be done down the middle of the train, which is more showtime than ever. So that is the reason. And so I'm hoping to go there tomorrow on the Q train.
Okay, but the Waffle Crew?
The Waffle Crew is not a group that I've worked with. They are a group that we're discussing doing something soon.
But what do they do?
The Waffle Crew are famous as light feet dancers. They are famous for having spearheaded the phenomenon of dancing on trains, ostensibly for change, for money that people would give them. They have become world famous. They have traveled all over the planet doing what they do. They're professional in a sense. They are a crew of anywhere from 5 to 12 people, and they are developing new moves, and what they do relates to past dance forms, like let's say what was called b-boying. Some people call it breakdancing. These worlds intersect. Like there's street dancers that perform in Washington Square or by the Brooklyn Bridge or by the Battery, for example, but all over the world, and they connect different kinds of dancing. If you see these street dancers, they will have some of the kind of acrobatics that were famous in the late b-boying phase. Early b-boying was not so much acrobatics. It was more floor dancing that is close to the floor. But then people became incredibly good at, let's say, backflips on one hand and things like that. That were tremendous, that were very show-stoppy kind of moves that would get people to applaud. Ultimately, it's about music and dancing.
It's interesting because I also know that when I think about it, I realized having riding out to Queens a lot on the express trains, which go out towards Forest Hills, where there's these long, like you go by, literally the express will skip 5 stops, and it gives the Showtime guys, it gives them a significant amount of time to perform. So they really like that train. So they'll go to, there's 2 long express.
Which train is that?
E or F train. They both make these 2 very long, 5.
I'll have to try these out.
Yeah, you should, because they both, any day. There's 2 express stops, one between Queens Plaza and Roosevelt, Jackson Heights, which skips like 5 locals. And then there's another one from, the next one, which is from Jackson Heights to Forest Hills, again, skipping like 5 local stops. So those 2, and then they'll just turn around at Forest Hills and go back. Because
there is a film that I made recently in Coney Island. There's a film that I made in Paris, where I was invited to go into the Paris metro late at night after it had closed, with a graffiti artist who frequents the metro at night. And I went down with him, and he painted several trains, which took about 4 hours down in the metro, getting chased by people. And the film is pretty amazing, and it looks gorgeous because I shoot with this little Canon camera that is so light. I put it in my pocket, but it shoots great HD video, and it sounds beautiful. So,
do you just shoot? So you're the crew?
I am the crew. Well, you couldn't have a crew in this situation.
No, of course not. Right.
This is dangerous,
yeah, right,
and
right,
it's
right.
late at night. No one, it's hard enough for me to be down there. But I've shot like the Coney Island film, which I shot largely with this camera and with a friend of mine, Art Jones, who
yes, I know Art.
Works with me with a lot of my films. And there's a film that I shot on the Brooklyn Bridge with a brass band and a whole crew of MCs from Brooklyn called the 9/11 Crew. Mm-hmm. So this is fresh for most people, and it's hip hop.
Yeah, you kind of been committed to shooting this culture for decades now. Like
yeah.
Going
I
on
mean,
4 decades, really.
It's keeping me young.
It is. You look younger than ever. It's disturbing almost. So Friday is going to be.
Friday is the Deadly Art of Survival
Deadly
with
Art
the Super
Survival.
8, and then Saturday is the 16 millimeter program at 6.
Followed by the Times Square stuff as the headliner, if you want to call it that. And then Sunday is your more, let's say, the last 10
my
years
recent stuff, which is the 16 mil, which is the. I like to. It's really digital media. You can't call it video.
Gotcha.
But it's HD digital media hip hop films that I've done in the last couple of years.
Right.
And then we end the program with another screening of The Deadly Art for those who couldn't get into the first screening because it's a small theater.
Go. That's great. Oh, they're showing it upstairs?
They're showing it at the Maya Deren room, which is my favorite room. It's really
it's
warm.
stadium seating, by the way.
It's a warm, great.
Yeah.
It's a great seating. Yeah. I love that film. The theater is really my theater.
So go. That's the 11th.
The 11th is Friday.
12th and 13th of March.
12th and 13th. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
And
it's exciting, Charlie.
It's not a retrospective. It's just some sampling of things that are really, most of it is from what I would call the distant past. But I'm happy to show it to people.
And yourself, apparently.
And I will, of course, be there.
Right.
And I like to say some things to people while, to tell some stories, because all this stuff goes with amazing stories. And, of course, we could get into some of those stories here because we have a few minutes, right?
Yeah.
Not too many minutes, no.
I mean, it's up on the East Village.
So do you have any questions about this?
Well, I mean...
one of the things that I'm showing in that I'm really most excited about showing this recent work because a lot of people haven't seen it or know about it. And I could go through some of the things that will. There's a film called the Five Grandmasters, which relates to the kung fu movies of the 70s vis-a-vis the whole b-boy culture. Really, much of the b-boy culture was highly influenced by kids going to 42nd Street and slipping into movie theaters and staying, all night watching kung fu movies on 42nd Street. There was like the Mad Monkey Kung Fu, 18-pole diagram. There was the Seven Grandmasters film.
So there wasn't just porn. There was also probably more.
I think
kung
the
fu stuff.
street culture of 42nd Street was largely action movies, which kung fu movies were a big part of.
Sure.
And they were cheap for these theaters the theaters rolled them back. It was a rep theater for street culture, if you get what I mean. It's the only rep theater for street culture that was, as far as I knew, in America, because you could go to 42nd Street at any time during day or night and watch movies that were so much a part of street culture.
Also blaxploitation films too, right?
Absolutely, black exploitation films were very much a part of it.
They took place in Harlem, but you were watching them in 42nd Street.
Yeah, but the thing is that kids would come in crews, not gangs, crews. In other words, they would show up with 7 or 8 of them, and they would, one of them would get in and open up the back door, and their friends would get in. And when you sat in the theater, like, your feet would like be glued to the floor because there was so much spilled like Coca-Cola on the floor. There was like a glue.
Everybody was hoping it was Coca-Cola.
And people were smoking reefer in the theater and cigarettes, of course, but mostly reefer. And there was, of course, loose popcorn everywhere, which the rats loved. So there was rats scurrying underneath your feet, and I was a pig in shit. That's all I can say. That was my idea of a rep theater.
Oh, right.
I loved going there, and I studied those films. Obviously, when I was making The Deadly Art of Survival, that's when I really started, which was, we're talking 1977, 1978. I started going to 42nd Street and started picking my ears up and hearing, what people were saying to the movie screen. Talking back to the movie screen was part of it.
And informed the dialogue that was appealing to you, and that you wanted to put together stories that kind of used dialogue like that.
And I started to imagine them as an audience for my own films. The people that I'm sitting there, even though I didn't know them, I started to fantasize, when I make a film, I'm going to bring it here. And when, as soon as I started to work with Fab Five Freddy and Lee Quinones on Wildstyle, my fantasy right from the beginning was to bring Wildstyle to 42nd Street and then just play it as a rep theater. In other words, bring it back every 3 months to 42nd Street, because it wasn't about usual theaters are called First Run, and it comes out with the big advertisements and everything, and then it's gone and it disappears at that time, because this is before internet,
before VHS,
VHS.
Yeah,
films disappeared, and the only rep theaters would show West Side Story, or film noirs. But here was a rep street that was showing my favorite films, and of course,
so it was also a preservation. It was also like a means of preservation of the film too, because you're saying, but what was the impetus for the I guess, I don't know, distributors or whoever
making
to
money
keep the films around, keep copies, because like you said, they disappear, so they didn't conceive of VHS
they would destroy
and home video
yet. Those films would be destroyed because you'd make 50 copies of a film, and where to put all these films. So, but the Kung Fu movies went from theater to theater and were on rotation, and they were probably bad prints that were very beat up. And I just thought it was fascinating, because when you watch Mad Monkey Kung Fu, for instance, one of my favorite films, you see the blueprint of hip-hop, in the sense that it's about style, and it's about form, and it's about having high extreme skills at your discipline, whether your discipline is Kung Fu or rapping, or if your discipline is b-boying on the street or in clubs, or DJing. They battled. All these people were into the battle. And the battle would have a winner. And these Kung Fu movies, the ones that I really loved, were not like massively violent. They were really studies in form and studies in discipline. And the best players in these films were people with incredible Kung Fu skills who would be, waged against opponents, and the one with the most skills would win in the end. Of course, he would be the only one alive, but still, there's different kinds of ways of competing. So the whole battle culture of hip-hop comes out of this idea.
It's a sociology lesson.
No, it's not.
A
It's
little bit
life lesson.
All right.
We
anti-academic about it.
We are not academic here.
I understand. We're just down in the sticky Coke and popcorn.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So again, film at the Anthology Film Archives this weekend. Go immerse yourself in all things, in the sticky and loose popcorn, and
we'll
bring
to release a few rats
into the for the real. What do they call the authentic experience? It
is about having an authentic cinema experience,
right?
And the thing that makes it really authentic is the people in the room.
And you'll meet Charlie, and maybe other friends of yours will be there. I don't know.
I think they will be there.
Yeah.
I'm inviting them.
So they'll show up.
Yes.
I've been to a couple of your events, and people do show up, your friends. And
yeah, absolutely. It's a
that's
scene.
nice. That's great.
All right.
Just blocks from where all of it took place.
Yes, y'all.
Thanks, Charlie.